Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
Well, howdy folks, my name is Lester Ryan Clark.
And I'm Keenan Diaz.
And we're the hosts of The Exorcist Minute, a show where we examine, extrapolate, and excavate the scariest movie of all time.
Each episode covers a single minute of William Friedkin's 1973 horror masterpiece, The Exorcist.
If you like deep dives, this show is the deepest.
Did you know the film's iconic theme song, Tubular Bells, wasn't written specifically for the movie?
Or that the 1973 audience members were throwing up and fainting in the theater before they ever got a glimpse of the demon?
What about all the crazy on-set mishaps, cast injuries, the director firing real guns?
Ooh, ever wonder where Ouija boards came from or how they got their name? How about some history on the Catholic Church or the Roman rite of exorcism? Or maybe we can tempt you with some juicy demonology lore. Did you know that Pazuzu had an ex-wife? Find The Exorcist Minute on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to your shows or at theexorcistminute.com. Until next time, folks,
the power of The Exorcist compels you.
Ever wonder what bridges the gap between your favorite film genres, subgenres, and movements? CinemaScope is here to explore these connections, taking you on a thrilling odyssey through the ever-evolving art of cinema. I'm your host, Andy Nelson, and in each episode, we embark on a deep dive into the forces that sculpt the world of film. From the styles you know and love, like heist films or the French New Wave, to the ones you may not be as familiar with, like Turkish Yeşilçam or Brazilian Nordwesterns, my expert guests and I unravel the complex tapestry of storytelling, style, and innovation that defines the world of film as we unpack the myriad catalysts of change that shape these diverse styles. Whether you're a student of film, a creative professional, or simply a devoted movie enthusiast, CinemaScope is your gateway to a richer, more immersive film experience. Don't just watch movies, understand them, appreciate them, and revel in their artistry with CinemaScope. Subscribe today.
Hooked on you, baby, you're golden. Time moves, I never noticed, just can't get enough. Got me wonderstruck.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Make Me a Nerd. I'm Mandy Kaplan, a mainstream mom whose mission it is to explore the worlds of sci-fi, fantasy, geek culture, all things nerdy that I've been avoiding and afraid of my whole life. I cannot go on this journey alone. Obviously, there's no way I could handle things like Lord of the Rings and Dragonlance and Buckaroo Banzai by myself. I, every week, am honored to have an esteemed colleague, friend, guest, loved one, sometimes total stranger, but just an utter fan, come with me on this journey and introduce me to something to expand my horizons. This episode features one of my favorite people on the planet. Spoiler alert. He is an author. He is a screenwriter. He is a producer. And his latest exquisite novel, Only This Beautiful Moment, has won the 2024 Stonewall Award and the Lambda Literary Award. Above all of these things, as impressive as they are, he is my favorite roommate of all time. The will to my grace forever and ever. It's Abdi Nazemian.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, nerd reporting for duty.
Only chance we get to actually be face to face anymore. I don't even have a podcast, Abdi. I just had to see you.
Remember when we were young and we would just like sit around and like watch
in our
TV
pajamas. Yes.
We had so much time. What happens to time?
Oh, let's not go there.
I mean,
this episode brought to you by Xanax.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we did have fun living together.
Absolutely. We connected through your former writing partner and my childhood friend since I was 10, Micah Schraft.
Yes.
When I was looking for a place to live in LA, he said, "Oh, well, my writing partner needs a roommate." You and I were total strangers. And within a week, we were thick as thieves.
Best friends. But like, was it pre-Damon or post-Damon? Because I lived in that apartment with, I think, 4 different people through the years.
Yes, you did. But who was your favorite?
Which is always
it's okay. I won't make you say because I know others and they might listen and they're wonderful. But it was post Damon, just post a breakup with Damon.
So I had just broken up with my first serious boyfriend. So I was probably in a highly emotional state.
You were.
One of my favorite memories is when you caught me smoking on the balcony. Because was a cigarette smoker. I was never a real smoker, but I
Right.
would sometimes, like, I would love to listen to, like, depressing Tori Amos songs, also very much of a Tori Amos nerd,
Yes.
and, like, have one cigarette, and yes.
You
And you
don't have
caught
to
me.
justify it to me. I love it. Yeah,
I don't do that. I don't do that
perfectly
anymore.
matched. No, now
We
we
were
have kids,
perfectly matched.
old and boring, but we
Yes.
were a really good match, and it's a friendship that has lasted and I cherish. And when I
Yes.
said, "Hey, I have this new podcast," you got all excited, and I said, "What kind of sci-fi or fantasy or, you know, LARPing or Dungeons and Dragons?" And you said, "Nope, not into any of that." There wasn't one sci-fi entity that you felt comfortable nerding out about.
No, so a whole group of people really laughed at me recently when we were talking about Marvel, and I said something about, like, how the only Marvel character I knew off the top of my head was Batman, and then they started to, like, laugh uproariously because I guess Batman is not a
Not
Marvel
Marvel.
character, it turns out.
Right.
Anyway,
Right.
this
So,
this is who I am, but I am a nerd.
right,
Just a
you're
very
very
gay one.
nerdy about, you said the things that take up my nerdy space are gay, iconic cultural
Yes.
phenomenons like Madonna, and you named a couple of others, and I know you're big into
Madonna,
old
old Hollywood,
films,
like
old Hollywood.
very like a TCM junkie. When I was 10 years old, I would tape back then it was called TNT, where they showed the old movies, and I would tape it all day while I was at school and come home and then organize all my VHSs that I taped alphabetically by female movie star.
Yes, this is
So, you
nerdy.
know, very nerd. I mean, I was very nerdy, like, you
Mhm.
know, Joan Crawford and Rita Hayworth and Judy Garland and Marilyn and,
Yes.
you know, all of that. Yes.
Yes.
Music, very much of like a music nerd.
Yes. Which
Yeah.
I enjoy, but then we settled upon Mommie Dearest as being one of the most
Yes.
iconic gay nerdy things. And to me it was like a movie I saw when I was 10 years old, and that was it. So I
Right.
had no relationship with
Do you
this.
remember finding it funny or
My mom and I
hard
would
to
joke
watch?
about it. She would, if I said, "Yes, Mom," she would say, "Yes, what?" And I would be like, "Yes, Mommie Dearest." We would joke.
That's a
But
good mother.
yeah, she would also beat me senseless. But don't worry about it.
Hopefully not with a wire hanger.
No.
You know, it's a funny thing because I watched the movie for the first time when I was around that age, I think a little older than 10, maybe 11 or 12, and I found it utterly hilarious. And one of the things that absolutely fascinates me is how someone at such a young age, but many young people do, watch this film and find it so funny. And then through the years, the movie has connected me to so many people. I've made friends because of it. Like, when someone loves it as much as I do, it's almost like an instant friendship. My husband's obsessed with it. We realized it like the first week, the first week we met, and like had these long phone calls, basically reenacting the movie beginning to end. In high school, I had a Mommie Dearest party that like is still legendary. Like, people talk about it to this day. It's really one of those things where, like all nerdy things, it creates community.
So if anyone out there is saying, "Mommy, what is this movie?" This was a 1981 film based on the autobiography of Joan Crawford's daughter, Christina Crawford.
Yes.
She wrote the book
Yes.
Mommie Dearest. She was not involved in the film. They took it and ran with it.
Yes, she was somewhat, as far as I know, a little bit maybe involved with the film. I don't think she was on set. She
was not
wrote
on
an
set.
early
I
She was
read
not
that.
on set. That I know. I know she wrote an early draft that was rejected and did not get screenplay credit. Her husband at the time was an executive producer.
Okay.
I think she was meant to be involved in the film, but as the film kind of careened toward its operatic final product, I think she was largely not involved.
Yeah, it is known as a campy, trashy, horrible, Razzie award-winning
Yes.
mess that has become so iconic and beloved and a cult classic for sure. But I guess I wanted to ask you, because I read a bunch of articles from people involved in the movie, and when they read the script, no one thought it was supposed to be campy, right?
Oh, not at all. Even, I mean, some of the first of all, let me say something about camp, since we're talking about nerdy, gay, and you could apply this to Mommie Dearest, to Valley of the Dolls, to a whole bunch of like the most iconic like gay camp films.
Mhm.
I am of the firm belief that all camp is unintentional. I
Okay.
do not believe in intentional camp. It does not
Okay.
exist as far as I am concerned. I am a real
Yes.
student of camp. I think what makes camp so funny is how seriously it takes itself. And that's where the fun lies.
But
And
also the discomfort.
well, I think a lot of it is about discomfort
Yeah.
and a lot of it, if we were to get really deep, I think a lot of camp, which really was like something that was largely identified by queer people, marginalized people, people who suffered a lot of abuse and trauma. I think it is like, it gives you permission to laugh at your worst experiences.
Mhm.
And it's like the most over the top version of the most painful things that you've had to hide your whole life because it was too shameful to talk about. And now you get to see it. But yes, with Mommie Dearest, like even when the movie was finished, even when there were cuts of it, they all, the people involved with it believed it was going to be this big Oscar
You
baity
can
movie.
That's what I wrote. They thought it was
Yeah.
Oscar bait. I
They
mean,
thought it was Oscar
you
bait. And by the
feel
way,
that oozing through the
yes.
screen.
Oh, for sure. And I'm pretty sure that Faye Dunaway did, if I remember correctly, get some kind of big prestigious award for it, like New York Film Critics, or now I can't remember. But what is
Well, she
amazing
won
about
the Razzie too.
she also won the Razzie, which was very, if I remember correctly, it was like very early on in the Razzie. So I think it's one of the movies that kind of defined what the
Yeah.
Razzies were. And I kind of hate the whole idea of the Razzies,
But
which
as
to
do
me is
I,
like,
especially for
yeah,
kids.
it's awful.
They like nominated the kids or
Oh,
something.
they
That's
do?
not
Oh, I
nice.
don't like that.
Yeah.
It's the thing that I don't like about the Razzies is I find them mean. I don't find the way that we laugh at Mommie Dearest mean. I actually think there's a lot of love for the movie. I've been to
Yes.
I went to a 20th or 25th anniversary screening in New York late in the 90s, it was, I think, late 90s. Christina Crawford herself was there in a theater full of gay men reenacting
Mhm.
all the lines.
Right.
Most of the cast minus Faye Dunaway. We will get to Faye Dunaway because I've had a little interaction with her about it. Most of the cast embraces the camp of it and honors that, like, we are not laughing because we're mean. We're laughing because we love the movie. The movie is
Right.
a real part of our lives and our DNA. And I think there is a genuine amount of affection for it in all the
I
laughter.
agree wholeheartedly. And one of my questions for you was, how many times do you think you've seen the movie? And have you ever
Oh,
gone
Lord.
to events for it? And what were they like?
Yes.
So
So
I already heard about 2 events without even asking.
I've seen the movie countless times. I mean, I couldn't count, but I would guess at least minimum a dozen, probably over 20.
Mhm.
The one, I have been to a few events. I hosted an event in high school,
Right.
which was, so I went to a boarding school in Connecticut. And when I arrived at that boarding school, it was exactly what you would think a boarding school in Connecticut in the 90s was. And me and a group of my friends by my senior year had just flipped everything that was cool on its head. So we got into like a sea of, polo shirts and lacrosse. And we were like these artsy kids who were just obsessed with like just the oddest things. I mean, crazy things. And so we had this Mommie Dearest party. Kids were coming with like wire hanger marks on their bodies. And one of my friends took a wire hanger and shaped it to say mommy. And teachers came. I mean, it was like, this is
I
when I
love
say
it.
it was legendary.
Yeah.
And my English teacher got so obsessed with Mommie Dearest, he would let me and my friend Sarah Blodgett act out scenes in our English class to the point where other students were complaining because they're like, why are we spending time we're supposed to be learning on watching these 2 kids literally like reenact the Barbara Bennett scene? But the best story, so now I'll get to my Faye story, is that I was a senior. I think she was a freshman, but I may be wrong. Freshman, sophomore. It was a Connecticut fancy boarding school. Comes up to me. I'd never met her and says, I heard about your Mommie Dearest party. My godmother is Faye Dunaway. You must write to her. I was also, I will say, genuinely obsessed with Faye Dunaway. She's one of the great actresses and movie stars of all time. I have no laughter at her. I think she's one of the greatest of all time to ever
And supposed to be very sweet and generous to everybody she ever meets.
Oh,
So, moving on.
absolutely. Just Google her. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I bought...
Never heard a nasty word.
Never. So I was a big movie memorabilia collector at a young age, starting at 10. Pre-internet, I would like write to like in the back pages of this movie collector's magazine, I would write to people, and I found the original Mommie Dearest lobby cards, which for the young people is what they used to display in movie theaters.
Oh,
do you remember
okay.
lobby cards?
Like the
Not a movie
cutout
poster.
things?
They were like a quarter of the size of a movie poster, and they
Oh,
would feature different images of the movie. And you
oh,
went to like the movie theaters ages ago. They would have them in the lobby.
oh.
And so I bought all the originals and I wrote Faye this incredibly long letter about the Mommie Dearest party and how it like set off this fever across the whole school and how like half the campus was like reenacting scenes and dressing up and I burned the edges and I bought this old movie star calendar and I wrapped it in this old movie star calendar. Anyway, this girl brings it back to LA after spring break. We get back to campus and I find her and I'm like, what happened? What did Faye say? Did I get all the lobby cards signed? And she said Faye originally like was very impressed with the packaging and the burn. She was like, your friend is so creative and look at this beautiful packaging. And then she read the letter and threw it across the room and said, never mention that movie to me again.
Oh my
And
God.
this is famously, I mean, you can look up, like, just look up Faye Dunaway
Right.
voicemail. Like, she left this famous voicemail for a reporter because she was so angry about people's obsession with Mommie Dearest. In a weird way, her inability to get in on the joke, I think, made people more obsessed.
Oh,
You know?
absolutely. I agree. And they say it really ruined her career. And who knows? Because she is
It
notorious for being difficult and
Yes, and
you
it
know,
did not
unpleasant.
ruin yeah, and it really did not ruin her career. She had many amazing roles post Mommie Dearest, and I think there's a lot of other reasons. I mean, pre-Mommie Dearest, for anyone who doesn't know, she starred in some of the greatest films of all time: Chinatown, Network,
Network.
Bonnie and
Yeah.
Clyde,
Yeah.
life-changing art. Post-Mommie Dearest, it was the 1980s, and they weren't making movies like Chinatown and Network anymore.
And she was
It,
an older woman at that point.
she was an older
So,
woman.
yeah.
Yes. So
Older, let's put that in quotes. She was still in her 40s, but
she was in her 40s in a different time, in a
right.
different Hollywood. She also followed up Mommie Dearest with Supergirl, a
Right.
different kind of camp classic.
Yeah.
So, it's all very fascinating, but I do think when it comes to camp classics, there are some actors who can kind of laugh it off and get in on the joke
Of
and be like,
course.
I get why it's funny.
Right.
And she has famously been unable to do that, which has now become part of the Mommie Dearest myth.
Well, it's a shame because it's, you know, the movie is edible to me. Every scene is so colorful and
Oh,
over the top. And the camera seems to
divine.
be wiped with Vaseline, though. It's very grainy and smooth and
Well,
blown
yeah.
out. But I'm not a filmmaker. But I do. Okay, so the movie starts with Faye Dunaway Joan cleaning.
Yes.
And her cleaning outfit includes socks and heels, like sandaled heels with
Yeah.
socks. And from that moment on, it's like everything she wore, every detail was
Oh,
so uh, fully realized and brilliant. And then she goes for a fully clothed, layered, scarved walk on the beach with her boyfriend. And they are just
yes.
wearing so many clothes on the beach. I mean,
hmm
it's it's not real life. None of this feels like real life. And perhaps it was in the
No.
40s when this was supposed to be taking place, but it just feels so larger than life
Yes.
and phony and campy.
It certainly does. I mean, the opening scene when she turns around and says, "Let's go." It's her
Yes, yeah.
first line. I think it's a solid like 4 to 5 minutes of the anticipation of the reveal of her face.
Right.
Because of course it was
Close
Faye
ups.
Dunaway, the greatest movie star of the 1970s, playing Joan Crawford, the greatest movie star of all time, in my opinion. And the anticipation of what her face is going to look like. And so it's like the whole credit sequence, she's putting her head in ice and you see her whole beauty
Yes.
ritual and you see her signing autographs on the way to the studio. And then when she finally turns around, she looks so
Bananas.
over the top. I
Yes.
mean, and part of what is so funny to me about it, you hear people from the set of Mommie Dearest and they all say like she was possessed by the ghost of Joan Crawford. Like literally that phrase comes up all the time.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I get that you think she was possessed by the voice of Joan or the spirit of Joan Crawford, but having seen every single Joan Crawford movie ever made, most more than once, like that is not what Joan Crawford was like. She was like this incredibly, I mean, yes, by the end of her career, she got kind of over the top.
Right.
For the beginning, like pre-adoption, she was this gorgeous, amazing actress who had a lot of subtlety and a lot of like, the it was almost like they took like one version of her that was so extreme and just made every scene that. Like
Right.
no nuance, no
Well,
layers.
but it also has a lot to do with what Hollywood did to Joan Crawford and
Yes.
chewing her up and spitting her out and using her when she was young and not wanting her when
Yes.
she wasn't. So I understand why this version of her was like, look what Hollywood has done to her.
Yes.
When we meet her, she is already this
Right.
exaggerated version.
Yes. And then the other really interesting thing about Mommie Dearest, if you want to like get into the making of it, is Faye Dunaway, apparently, by all the accounts of people who were involved, was very sympathetic to Joan Crawford. And even
Yes.
in the like, there's a lot of like legendary interviews she gave about Mommie Dearest in the promotional phase
Mhm.
of the movie.
Before she knew what
And
the world thought.
before she knew
Yeah.
exactly. And it's fascinating to me because so many, apparently, one of the things Christina was very upset about is that the book is very much told from the point of view of Christina.
Hmm.
And the movie really like shifted focus.
Hmm.
It introduces Joan first. In script form, it seemed more sympathetic. And Faye gave all these interviews about like wanting a balanced perspective and stuff. But
Hmm.
then you think like, how could you say you're sympathetic to this woman, but you play her like in
Right.
this
Well,
wildly over the top way. It's
yeah. I
amazing.
mean, w- what we see of her before she gets the babies, she's, a different person. And when she gets the babies, there's a real vulnerability that she holds Christina when she adopts her. And then
Right.
she turns and stands at the top of the stairs for a photo
The
op. And you're like,
staircase.
oh,
Yes.
I thought you genuinely fell in love with this baby when they handed it to you. So it's hard
Right.
to know what her motivations were and are. And the other kids that she adopted are not in this movie, but she adopted more children, correct?
Yes. So in Mommy Dearest are the two older children, Christina and
Who
Christopher.
both claim
Christopher's the one
abuse.
who's, yes, and
The others
Christopher
do
is
not.
the one who's strapped in.
Right.
Cindy and Kathy were the younger twins. And they say they were not abused, but they were also much younger. And
Right.
Christina, who has, been interviewed about it, always says like Joan changed quite a bit by the time
Okay.
she had those twins. So, I mean, I personally have no doubt that Christina and Christopher were likely abused. I do
Yes.
believe it. There were many,
Yes.
many people who have corroborated Joan's
Yes.
alcoholism, her mental illness, all of which at that point, because of the times and who she was undiagnosed. Joan
Right.
herself, it's not in the movie, but Joan herself had a horrific childhood of
Mm.
abuse,
Mhm.
physical and sexual. She was, I think, somebody who very much believed that like discipline was the only way. And probably, I think, in some messed up psychological way, resented her children for having all the things she never had when she was young.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And there's also what I picked up on notes of, and I know people like this that love babies because babies are just
Yeah.
cute and cuddly and they give you nothing but
Yes.
affection. And then they
Right.
start to express themselves.
Right.
When
Right.
Christina was 5 and she wouldn't eat the damn steak or whatever, or 10.
Yes.
And there are people in this world who are not equipped to love children once they can speak
Yes.
their minds.
Yes.
They only love little cute
Absolutely.
babies. And
Right.
I think
And
she
that
was
might
that
very well
person.
have been, yes, that very well might have been who she was. And it's hard, like, I can't, I mean, I'm obsessed with Joan Crawford as a movie star. I'm obsessed with Mommie Dearest as a film. I'm obsessed with Faye Dunaway as a star as well. We can never say. I think in a strange way, even though it is a camp classic and even though we all congregate to laugh at the movie, I genuinely think Mommie Dearest as a film was crucial in opening up conversations about abuse
Mhm.
because it allowed us to enter it in a
Mhm.
way that felt safer than
Mhm.
looking at the trauma, which when it came out was still a very new concept for most people.
Yeah.
And so I think there's not like, I'm someone who has written about my own experiences with hazing and abuse. I'm very aware of the conversations, its history, how we talk about it. But I really think like in a really interesting way, the film did do its job, as strange as it is, because it turned into camp.
Right.
I really do think there's something to the idea that camp is a much more safe, communal way to deal with things we're not ready to deal with.
Agreed. You have to heighten and laugh at in order to open the conversation
Yeah.
or heal. I mean, it's
Yes.
yeah.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
Well, when the movie, you were correct about the opening credits and her
Right.
beauty regimen, but
Yeah.
then when she's cleaning, this is where I had the idea if I were making this a musical, what would the songs be? Where would they go? How would they work? And I texted you and I said, I'm
Yes.
doing this if you want to do your own. So my first song after the opening credits is called Mad at the Dirt.
Oh, that's a good one.
Because she yells at this poor maid. And then when the maid cowers in fear, she says, I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at the dirt.
I'm mad at the
so
dirt. It's
dramatic.
such a good line.
Yeah. Yes.
And she yells at the woman who also played Large Marge in Pee-wee's Big Adventure, if I'm correct. I'm pretty sure I am.
I've never seen Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Isn't that crazy?
No. Have you never seen Pee-wee's Big Adventure?
No.
Wow. That's wild. Large Marge. It's such a iconic movie too. You have to see that. That's another movie someone should be on your podcast about, because that's a real cult classic.
Yes.
And Large Marge is such a cult classic figure, and it's just so funny to me that this character actress ended up in two major. I'm sure she's been in others. I should look her up. Anyway, she yes, Mad at the Dirt. See, when you texted me that, my opening number would be called Let's Go.
Right.
And
yes, that makes
because
sense.
Of course that's the very first line that Faye says in the movie. And to me, if I were to do it as a musical, I would really have an opening number that tracked Joan Crawford's career up until, because what Mommie Dearest is missing to me and why it's so funny. One of the reasons I think people find it so funny is because when you first see it when you're young, like when I first encountered the movie, I knew a lot about Joan Crawford, but
you did. I didn't.
Unlike most people don't. But why I think it's so funny is most people know nothing, and they put people in this movie with very little information or context.
You are dropped in. When she's at the height of her fame and fortune and ego, and you don't know why.
Right. But my opening number would be Let's Go, and it would be Joan Crawford just constantly saying Let's Go when they tell her her career is over. Because the reason to me she's the greatest movie star of all time, and I highly recommend for podcast listeners everywhere, the Karina Longworth podcast, You Must Remember This.
Yes.
In my opinion, she's done a couple that are her best ever series, and one of them is called 6 Degrees of Joan Crawford. Okay. And she tracks Joan's career in 6 episodes. Mm-hmm. And it ends with Mommie Dearest, and she has a very beautiful analysis of the film. But the reason she does that is because Joan Crawford survived everything. She was a silent movie star, one of the biggest silent movie stars. Then when talkies came and all the silent movie stars' careers ended, Joan didn't. She became even more famous, and then she became one of the biggest MGM stars. And then MGM gave her this shit movies, and she became box office poison, and she went right to Warner Brothers, and her first movie was Mildred Pierce, and she wins an Oscar. And then she has this whole phase of her career, Warner Brothers, where she makes these more adult, complex films, and then that phase ends, and what does she do? She becomes a producer, which back then was very rare, especially for women. And she produces this incredible movie called Sudden Fear that is so good. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. And she gets an Oscar nomination. And then that phase of her career ends. And what does she do? She teams up with Bette Davis, which was her idea, and makes Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which then begins the more kind of cult phase of her career, making these absurd horror films.
Right.
Then she becomes marries the head of Pepsi and gets on the board and becomes the spokesperson for Pepsi across the world.
Now, spoiler alert, you're going to the end of the film.
Sorry, I'm going to the end. But my only point being this woman was a survivor.
Yes.
I mean, the idea that somebody who was a silent movie star was still the lead actress in films in the 1960s was unheard of.
Yes. I just wish she could have done it with humanity. I mean, she was not kind to people along the way, unfortunately.
No. And there's you should listen to You Must Remember This, because there's she talks in that last episode about Mommie Dearest about how do we separate art from the artist, and when. Right. And she says that in the case of Joan Crawford, you really can't and really you can't ever, I think, separate art from the artist. You have to make choices about whether
Right.
it bothers you or not.
Right.
But she basically
It's a
talks about
constant challenge when Michael Jackson
it's
comes on the radio or,
totally,
we're in this is the world we live in now. You have to decide what's comfortable and what's not, and what art
yeah,
is just so damn good you can't let go of it. And
yes,
what you
yes.
I can easily write off most Woody Allen films, but Annie Hall I would still watch.
Yeah, and some of it for me often has to do with, did I discover the art before I knew
Right.
the extent? For me, like, I grew up on Michael Jackson. He was my
Right.
favorite artist of all time. Like, I can never separate from that
Right.
music because it's tied to memories of childhood that have nothing to do with the
Of
revelations that
course.
came
Um
later. But, one of the things about Joan Crawford is just the idea that, like, her lack of humanity, the things that the ways in which she also dehumanized herself were also the reasons she was able to be this, like, dominating force in a Hollywood that broke women down. And so
it's
it's
just,
like, to see the image is tied to what we now know about the image in a complex and deep way that is both amazing, sad, tragic,
it's
funny, like
probably a
all of it.
necessary evil that she had to be all of those things, that she had to be such a
Yeah.
hard-nosed bitch, but it's frustrating,
Yeah. Well,
that
also
her
she made great art. I
right.
mean, you go back and see her movies. She was an incredibly emotive actress who made films about a
I don't
lot
know
of
that I ever have. I probably have seen her younger stuff, but I know I've seen Whatever Happened to Baby Jane
yeah.
and some of her older stuff. But
Yeah. I mean, you should
um,
definitely, at the very least, see Mildred Pierce. My God.
oh yeah, Helene would be so mad if she knew I had never. Um, so back to our movie, they hand
Sorry.
her
Yeah.
this black market baby. Her
Mhm.
boyfriend arranges. I'm assuming it's black market because basically she's told you can't adopt because you're what was
Yes.
it? You're
She has a
single
great
or
scene. Yeah. And then they call her unsuitable and she grabs her file from the adoption. She's like, unsuitable.
yeah. So she gets handed this beautiful infant, and then obviously there would be a touching song called "I Shall Call You Christina." Uh,
I
and
love that. Yes, my idea for that song was gonna be called "Christina Darling," but I did have
ooh,
the same moment. But
yes,
just this
that's a big
idea of,
moment to
like,
get the child because that's when
yes,
her whole
yes,
life shifts. And
absolutely, yes.
um and and then that's when we get into the Mommie Dearest we all know and love. She is nuts from the start. Well, they flash forward to Christina's, I'd say, fourth birthday party or fifth birthday party.
Birthday, yeah, this absolutely Joan Crawford, this is real. A lot of the movie is actually not real, by the way. It's not from the book, and it's
Right.
dramatized in ways that aren't accurate. Um, but it is very real that Joan Crawford loved to wear matching dresses with Christina.
I
There's all these
imagine
photo
so.
shoots of the real Joan and the real Christina in these horrific matching
And there's this
outfits.
elaborate birthday party with pony rides in the
Oh,
backyard.
yeah.
And it is the saddest feeling party ever. And I was thinking, I don't think Christina's genuinely friends with all these kids. They probably had to rent central casting
Oh,
extras for her birthday to make her feel popular. But it's just it's
absolutely.
so sad,
Well,
this
and
elaborate, and it's very
and
Housewives. They've done that on the
it's
Housewives of Beverly Hills
oh,
too.
have they? I don't watch
Oh yeah.
Housewives, but I will say it was pretty standard in old Hollywood. The childrens of stars were props in photo shoots. Their birthdays
Yeah.
were often thrown by the studios
Yeah.
for reasons of
Oh,
photos. Like, I don't know
right?
if you've ever seen Postcards from the Edge,
Yes.
my
Yeah.
favorite Meryl Streep film. There's this great, it's obviously about Debbie Reynolds
Right.
and Carrie Fisher, and, like, one of my favorite lines is when Shirley MacLaine, who's playing the fictional Debbie Reynolds, says, like, I'm not so bad. Look at Joan. Look at Lana," about Lana Turner, who
Right.
was also a
Right.
complicated mother. And the Meryl Streep Carrie Fisher character is like, "These are my options, Joan, Lana."
Yeah. No,
Couldn't she just have a nice mom who's not a movie star?
it is it's so uncomfortable, this poor child posing as she's opening up a present and then getting told
Yeah,
you can't keep your presents, which I understand the mentality of, like, you pick your favorite present and then you give the rest to kids who don't have presents, but it's
right,
all done for Joan. It's done out of this motivation to appear to be someone she's not, to
right.
seem magnanimous and like she's loving, and it's so sad and uncomfortable. And then they jump cut again in Christina's life to now she's 10 and played by Mara Hobel.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Different actress from
Yes.
Birthday Party Kid.
I think was Birthday Party Kid not her?
I don't think so. And then are we both IMDbing as fast as we possibly can?
I feel like it was her.
I mean, they look alike. Or maybe I'm just crazy.
I think it's Mara Hobel from the beginning. And they just make her. Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay, good for her. Because I felt like she was aging, like they were aging her up. And she, there's a scene in the mirror where she's pretending to be Joan with a hairbrush, which I think is flattery, right? Imitation is the highest form of flattery. And Joan catches her saying, "Oh, my adoring fans," name of a song in the musical. "Without you, my adoring fans, my adoring fans." I would, if my mom caught me doing that, my mom would laugh and be like, "Oh, you think, you're play acting and you're pretending to be me in my mirror. That's so flattering." But Joan flips out and starts butchering her hair. And this is
it's really one of the most painful scenes in the movie.
I know. I thought little Mara Hobel was so good, and she was nominated for a Razzie. And I was watching her cry, and I was like, "Oh my God, this kid's so good."
I know. I mean, the interesting thing about that movie is it's filled with incredible actors. I mean, a lot of the actors were like method actors who came from, the Strasberg studio. Mara Hobel was great. Dinah Scarwood had been an Oscar nominee, I think, the year before. Faye is obviously one of the great actors. And I honestly think, you could also say that they all gave great performances. I genuinely think Faye's performance is phenomenal. I mean, it's batshit and over the top and operatic, but at the same time, it is a truly unique performance that nobody's ever given before or can give since. It's so individual and odd, and I think that's why we have to laugh at it, because the intensity of it makes us uncomfortable.
Well, this scene in particular is the only time I caught huge continuity errors. I don't know if you've ever watched.
There are quite a few continuity errors in the movie. There are others.
Little Christina's hair is long in the front, then she cuts it, and then is long in the front again, and then she cuts it, and it's long in the front again. And it was just really poorly edited together.
Big continuity errors, I believe, in the pool scene. Have we already passed it, or was the pool scene before?
I think it was before. I think we passed it.
Oh, because I have a musical number for the pool scene.
Oh, go for it.
Because one of the best lines, the most quoted. This movie is full of lines that literally, my friends, it's not all gay. A lot of my Mommie Dearest friends are straight, actually. So I shouldn't say it's just, gay men. They're largely gay men. But it's when they have a race in the pool.
Yes.
And Joan beats her daughter, and Christina gets very upset and is like, "I'm never going to play with you again, ever." And Joan is like, "I am bigger and I am faster and I will always beat you." And so I thought there should be a song in that scene called "I Will Always Beat You," which is just about how I'm better than you and I'm bigger and more talented. But it's a setup for dual meaning, which if we're going to make this campy musical,
yes, we will.
Yes.
And there were continuity errors in the pool? I didn't notice.
Yes, I believe Carol Ann, who's played by Rutanya Alda, who for anyone who's listening and is going to deep dive on Mommie Dearest, she wrote diaries during the making of Mommie Dearest.
Yes, I have her article
published.
Yeah.
And she is one of the main sources of information because her diaries are full of the craziest stories from the making of.
She was afraid of Faye Dunaway on set.
Quite afraid of Faye.
Yes.
And one of the hilarious things, I mean, I think she kind of appears and disappears in that scene in a way that doesn't make any sense. And another thing that doesn't make any sense is how Carol Ann ages versus how Joan ages. I don't know if you noticed in the movie, Carol Ann.
Joan never ages until the very, very, very end. Yeah.
Yes. Carol Ann is aging, and Joan is somehow just magically the same.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I guess Faye Dunaway didn't want to look old. I don't know.
That's what it reeks of that to me, but
yes.
Really, she locks Christina in the pool house and says, "You'll wait in here," and then she tries to make her eat the raw steak for many scenes, which is just
Yes.
memorable and uncomfortable and sad. And I assume that's real from the book. I assume that really happened to
That
Christina Crawford.
I believe that really did happen. Yes,
Yeah.
that did. I mean, a lot of the movie. I said earlier that some of the movie was not real. A lot of it is,
Yeah.
and some of it is embellished or kind of like as they often do in biopics and true stories. They kind of create amalgamate, like the boyfriend is like a version of multiple men.
Right.
Carol Ann is like not a real person, but she's inspired by a group of
All the staff.
Jones
Yeah.
assistants and stuff. So they kind of are playing with reality.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the boyfriend. He's such a nothing part, but then he gets this big dramatic scene with her where the
One of the
breakup
best
scene.
scenes.
And
Yeah, where she
he first of all, he's shaking her, and
Mhm,
it was so frustrating because it seemed so phony and movie. It didn't feel like a real
mhm.
person with real anger. It was like, this isn't a scene where I hit a woman, so this is what I'm going to do. And it was
Yeah.
so awkward. But then he goes to the door and says, "Get up, there's no camera in here," which is a great line. And if
Yes.
you're acting,
You're wasting your time. If you're not, you're
you're
wasting
wasting my
mine.
time.
See, I
And
didn't even rewatch the movie for this, and I can say all the lines and stuff.
yeah, so
And then Faye is like, "I'm not acting."
that's my song. I'm damn mad. Parentheses. I'm not acting.
Oh,
That's
I
my song
love
title.
that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that.
So he's out of the picture, which is sad for the kids. Like maybe he had some calming effect on Joan, or maybe he could have protected them in some way, but he's gone. He didn't really
I
live
love
there,
that.
right? He was just, he
I
floated
don't
in and out.
believe he did. I think he floated in and out. Now, my song for that is property of MGM, because when they come in on that scene, Joan is really angry because she's humiliated by Louis B. Mayer at Perino's, which is
Right.
her restaurant. And she comes in and she's like, "Mayer's got property of MGM tattooed on my backside." And that line, like just this idea, because it's true. I mean, Joan and movie stars back then were the property of the movie studios. They told you what movie you made, where you went,
Right.
what your kid's birthday party was going to be. You were owned.
Well,
You were,
that's the season of You Must Remember This that I dropped into, was the studio,
Yeah.
the Mayor versus whatever.
Yes.
And I was fascinated by, I love that
It is.
podcast.
It's a great podcast.
I mean, this podcast is slightly better.
I
but-
mean,
and
obviously.
more well researched, obviously. But then
I will tell you something fun about Perino's, though, which is,
Yeah.
so Jonathan, my husband, and I are both obsessed with Mommie Dearest, and it's a big part of our life. And I actually call him Pally. We all call him Pally, which comes from Mommie Dearest,
Mhm.
which is so funny when people are like, "How did he get his nickname?" I'm like, "Oh my God." But but he actually went on, I think, eBay or Etsy. I'm not sure where. One of the eBay, Etsy, one of those kinds of places. And he found all these, because we both love old Hollywood, like
Mhm.
old menus from the iconic Hollywood restaurants like Chasen's and all that. And he found one for Perino's. And Perino's really was Joan Crawford's favorite restaurant. It was a real
sure.
place.
Yes.
And so we have like one of the original Perino's menus framed in our kitchen, which is
Oh,
very
that's so
special.
cool. Well, here's a
Yes.
good chance. Here's a good, if I may see you at the bench, please, for a sidebar.
Yes.
Do you remember where we went when my mom came to town when I was living with you? We
Oh,
went to
God.
a very notorious.
Dantana's?
No.
Which one? Where did we
We
go?
went to Vitello's. So we could say to my mom, this is where what's his face shot his wife, Robert Blake.
Oh my God.
And she was so into it. Like she
Of
was like, okay, so
course.
he sat in that booth and he ate here and then outside and
I
yeah.
know.
Yep.
You feel that stuff. I still love, like, we live very close to the Chateau Marmont, and
Yeah.
every time I go there, I feel the history. I'm like, oh my God, this is where Natalie Wood was like, hanging out, and where Belushi died. You know,
Yeah.
the energy of old Hollywood, especially because LA is such a young city, all things considered. Like, when you feel that history,
Yep.
it's really cool. I mean, I will say there's a movie memorabilia shop in Hollywood Boulevard, and years and years ago when I was early in my relationship with Jonathan, I walked in and they had, and I wish I had bought it now, they had the painting in Mommie Dearest of Joan. You know how in the house there's a portrait of Joan that's painted?
Mhm.
They had it. It was
Oh,
for
wow.
sale.
Wow.
The original painting. But it was like, in the tens of thousands,
Yeah,
$30,000, $40,000.
you know.
I couldn't quite afford it at the time, and I still probably
Yes.
couldn't afford it now. But I feel like I should have taken out a loan and bought that fucking thing.
Yes.
Could you imagine having the original portrait of
You
Joan?
don't need it. You have the Perino's menu. That's even
We have the
better.
Perino's menu. But what I do not have is signed lobby cards by Faye Dunaway. That I do
No,
not have.
you don't have
I
those.
could have. I almost had
You blew it.
those.
You blew it, kid.
Very much so. Very much so.
And now back to our regularly scheduled program.
Sorry. The sidebar was fun, though.
Right? Memories. So Joan goes to see Louis B. Mayer. She gets all dolled up. She screams at Christina because Christina's playing in the yard and disturbing her beauty rest. And this is where the song Box Office Poison kicks in. And it's the Louis B. Mayer number.
Oh, interesting.
Because he fires
My
her from
song,
the studio.
So I had Property of MGM, and then one of my favorite lines, which was actually my voicemail back when people had, I guess answering machines in college. I think I had one. And then in my early 20s, instead of like, "Hi, this is Abdi, leave a message," if you called me, literally what you heard was, "Tina, bring me the axe." Beep. That was my voicemail.
Yes.
So because after the MGM scene, which actually that's very fictionalized, the real Joan wanted out of her contract. She wasn't going that way. She was being given bad roles. This is where I feel like the nuances of the real Joan were more complex than portrayed in the movie. Obviously, the movie has very little complexity.
This gave her, I was sympathetic. Oh, they're kicking her out because she's not making money anymore and she's too old. And that made me sympathize with her.
True that she wasn't making money anymore because they were giving her such bad movies. The part that is not in the movie is she wanted out of her contract and went right to Warner's. And in real life, what I remember Christina saying, like the axe scene was real. Joan did kind of destroy her rose garden and chop down a tree in a fit of rage in the middle of the night, because in the real Mommie Dearest, she talks about how she would have these night raids. Like probably she was, because she was an alcoholic and quite clearly mentally ill. She probably was drinking herself into a state, but it wasn't tied. The real chopping down of the tree was not tied to being fired by MGM. But I feel like there has to be a song called "Bring Me the Axe,"
sure,
which is just, I mean, come on, a musical number with axes.
But in that scene, another error, her mouth is not moving. She's just going and cutting the roses. And they did an ADR, the most awkward ADR session in the world, with her being like, "I'll tell you, Mr. Mayor." And she's like going on. And it's like her mouth isn't moving. So Faye Dunaway had good. And she's like
heaving, and then her face starts getting cut, and the blood and she's doing it. I mean, the image, like, part of what I love too about this movie, it really is one of the last movies that was made the way movies used to be made, where everything looks so sumptuous. Like, and
the music swells you throughout.
And the music is by Henry Mancini, one of the greats. It's every detail is so gorgeous. You can tell they spent so much money on the costumes and the sets. And
that silver dress. She's wearing the silver dress with the shoulder pads and the cutouts on the sides and the back. And it was, I was so into that dress.
And I really think another reason why so many people are obsessed with this movie, because I was thinking about it as I was driving in anticipation of talking to you, was like, so many of us, especially gay men, grow up obsessed with glamour and old Hollywood and the artifice of it. I think because we recognize a little bit of our own lives as closeted people who are creating images and hiding. And I think in this weird way, Mommie Dearest was probably the first time any of us saw all of that artifice being ripped to shreds. It's like you're seeing the image you were so obsessed with being torn apart in front of your eyes. And there's something incredibly empowering about that too. Because you're like, oh, wait, I can rip down my own mask and just be one person and stop living that way. Because it's a horrible way to live,
I mean, it's also, I think to see that is an artifice, that's what you're aspiring to. And even those people aren't happy. And there's darkness and sadness, even with all that makeup on the pig. Like, I think it's important to realize that.
But there always is. Right. Yes, which is why I think we're also I'm very, very fascinated by why. Like, I was 10 years old when I became obsessed with every gay act, Judy,
Mhm.
Joan, Marilyn,
Mhm.
all of them. I didn't know what being gay was. I
Mhm.
didn't even know there was a word for it. Like in
Mhm.
my culture in the Persian language, there wasn't even a word for being gay then.
Mhm.
I had no awareness these were gay icons until much later in my
Right.
life. And yet, at such a young age, I found them all of them. And they
Yeah.
weren't even of my era.
Nope.
And so there is something being communicated. And I do think a lot of it has to do with this idea that, like, as a gay person of my generation, I was constantly putting on a show, building a
Yes.
mask. And when you're
Escaping.
watching, you're escaping. And when I watch those old, Judy and Marilyn especially, you feel the pain. I mean,
Mhm.
the artifice is so
Mhm.
clear, but
Right.
you feel the pain. And even in their comedic performances, you're like, this human is in pain. I can tell. Like,
Well,
and so you feel seen.
yes.
But it's awful because you understand, like, there's two really dark sides of that. Dark side number one is you absolutely destroy yourself like Marilyn Monroe or Judy Garland, and you're
Mhm.
gone. And you see that in the gay community with the epidemic
Mhm.
of suicide and self-harm. And then the other dark side is you become a Joan Crawford who is so afraid of the image slipping that you become a monster. And
Right.
that's awful too. Luckily, we've now entered an age where most of us can live openly and we don't have to maintain a facade, because I think all those of us who did it at a young age know how much of yourself it eats away at.
Yes. But so much of what you're saying, Abdi, I've been talking to people week in and week out on this podcast, people who felt disenfranchised because they weren't
Mhm.
athletic, they weren't cool
Yes.
kids, they were nerds, they were geeks.
Sure.
And everything you're describing, they found in He-Man and Star Trek. They
Right.
found an aspirational escape or somebody who finally was giving a voice to them,
Yeah,
to their
absolutely.
issues and their pain. And so it's interesting that although I wouldn't ever say, oh, Star Trek and Mommie Dearest, hand in hand, but they were
Right.
having the same effect on those people who were watching it and feeling all of these feelings and feeling seen.
But
And it's,
yes.
um,
Well, and that's what your show is really probably about, because when you're saying make me a nerd, I mean, to be a nerd is to feel disenfranchised,
mhm,
marginalized, to feel other.
mhm,
And when you feel that way and you find a piece of art that not only makes you feel seen or in some weird way, but then also connects you with others. Like, because the thing about a movie like Mommy Dearest or Star Trek or whatever is it's such a niche thing in the mainstream society that when you find people who get it the way you do, you're like, oh, you're my people. And now I'm
community.
not a yeah, it's community. Art really creates community in a intensely powerful way, and this movie really does. It's a shorthand for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Um, I can't believe that our conversation is coming to an end in a few
Oh
minutes,
god,
but I know, right?
and
Flies
we're only at
by.
the Rose Gardens, and Christina hasn't even grown up yet.
So, but wait, so Christina goes in the bathroom. I think this is when she's told she's going to boarding school, and she's
Yeah,
in the bathroom. Oh no, she's supposed to clean the bathroom after
right.
the
The
wire
wire
hanger.
hanger scene. We
No
haven't
more
even
wire
discussed the
hangers,
most famous scene of the
right?
movie. Yeah,
Um, so all of the wire hanger thing happens, and she's left alone in the bathroom. And her sweet brother says,
yeah.
"I'll help you clean," and she says, "No, go back to bed to protect
Well, she
him."
says, "Strap yourself in."
Uh,
Because the real Christopher Crawford had to be strapped into bed. Well, not had to be, was. Joan Crawford strapped her son in bed. He had to be released to go to the
why?
bathroom at night. I mean, wait, why?
Oh
I don't know. I mean,
gosh.
Joe, apparently because he would run away. I don't
Uh
know.
huh.
But then there's no excuse for strapping your child in
No,
bed. I'm sorry.
no.
It is absolutely insane.
So
Um,
no more wire hangers. Obviously, the most iconic scene. But then she's in the bathroom and she's like, "Clean this up," and she leaves
yeah.
Christine alone. And Christine just says, "Jesus Christ."
Jesus Christ.
Name of a
Yeah.
song, reprise at the reading of the will when the guy's like, "Oh, she left you nothing." She goes,
Jesus.
"Jesus Christ."
Jesus Christ.
I built in a reprise.
I
This
love it.
musical
There
is
has to
practically
be.
done. It's practically
You
done.
need reprise. I know we really skipped over a lot, but
Well, no,
because
I mean the
favorite scene.
musical is like
Well, I
practically
want to
written.
ask you,
Yeah.
what is your, as someone who's not a huge fan, I can tell you as a huge fan what my favorite scene is, but what is your favorite scene?
Um, oh God, my favorite scene.
Yeah, like, is there a scene that you're like, that's the one? That's the one that, like,
I mean, no more wire hangers. It has to be,
yeah.
right? It just
I mean, mine is Barbara Bennett. which is when it's later in the movie when Christina's expelled from school and Joan brings her home when a reporter is doing a story on her for Red Book. The way Faye says Red Book is just so iconic. And then they go in and they get in this fight in front of the reporter, which is a very famous scene where Christina's like, why did you adopt me?
Yeah. Yep.
And then Joan tries to explain it, and she's like, why can't you give me the respect that I'm entitled to? And Christina's like, because I am not one of your fans.
Yes.
Which not one of your fans has to be a song in the musical. But
it's there.
But that scene gets so, I mean, Joan starts slapping her, and then
that is a lie, is what I call the slapping song.
Yes. And then like Barbara Bennett and Carol Ann are literally trying to like pull Joan off. And Faye is just like, her fists are up in the air and she's screaming. And I mean, that to me is this. I know why the wire hanger scene is iconic, and it's a perfect scene. But the Barbara Bennett scene to me is the real.
Agreed. And you have such an intense scene where Christine finally uses her voice, Christina. And and that's for me, followed by, you have to lighten it up in the third act with the Cola King, a patter song sung by the character of Steele. The nice guy.
Al Steele.
Right.
Al Steele.
He slips Christina some money to help her out. He actually tries to stand up to Joan. And then when he dies and she sits at the board and they're like, oh no.
Another.
There's obviously the big 11 o'clock number. Don't fuck with me, fellas.
Don't fuck with me, fellas. Of course. Don't fuck with me.
You feel it.
Oh my God. The Pepsi scene. I mean, that scene with the boardroom. The thing about this movie is, it is one iconic scene after another.
Yeah.
There is not a scene in the movie that is not like ready for drag queens. Like every single scene.
Totally agree. And if a scene starts off a little slow and you're thinking, oh, then all of a sudden it washes over you. Oh no, we're building to this scene.
Yeah.
Like here we go.
Genuinely, the movie gives you no time to breathe. It's like there is no. Movies have to have levels. Like a movie that's really going to make you feel what it must have felt like to be the real Christina Crawford, which must have been horrific, would have all of these like levels of nuance. And this movie is just always at 100 from beginning to
Agreed. End. And I was reading about it that there are versions with an extra hour. This was a very trimmed version that we saw. And I think that's why, because it never lets you out of its grip. It just picks you up and holds you.
Ever lets you
an hour and 50 minutes or whatever.
But you know what? I am so happy about that. I mean, what the movie to me, I say this all the time, this movie is a gift. It's a gift to humanity. Like it is a true, and this kind of camp film is the kind of film that I don't know. Like, do you think there has been a real camp classic made in the last decades? Like, I can't really think of one. The last one I can think of is Showgirls. That's a true
but
camp.
I don't think they intended for that. I mean, this is not a fair answer, but some of the Christopher Guest, but they were trying to be campy.
But see, I don't think those are campy.
Right.
I think those are great comedies. They knew they were making a comedy. Right. I mean, the thing about Showgirls is, and the thing about Mommie Dearest or Valley of the Dolls or Mahogany with Diana Ross, which is a great camp classic, or some of Joan Crawford's own latest films, which are real campy, like, they were all aiming to win Oscars. Like, but part of how that happens is Hollywood giving creative people so much power that they can do this. And I think part of what is amazing about Mommie Dearest is Faye Dunaway was coming off of this incredible streak of like just beautiful movies and Oscar nominated and winning performances that you could allow her to go that rogue. And same with Showgirls, which was made by some very powerful people. Like, I don't know that Hollywood gives creative people the freedom and the budgets to make a camp classic anymore.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, but the Christopher Guest movies to me are comedies. Like John Waters.
I agree. That was a dumb answer.
John Waters is genuinely funny and aware he's making camp.
Right.
Part of my issue with some of the Ryan Murphy stuff when people call it camp is I'm like, it's too self-aware to be camp. It knows it's heightened.
Right.
So it's not camp because it's not going in thinking it's, some prestigious work.
Right. No,
like what I'm looking for is a
I think that's your definition of camp. And I think other people would define it as, exaggerated or heightened drama. or,
Yes, I would urge those people to like read, Susan Sontag's essay on camp.
Okay.
I would urge those people to research because as a nerd, it's my job here as the nerd guest,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I do think camp and the history of camp is a meaningful thing to the communities it's about. And I think to like change the meaning of it to just be anything that's heightened, it's like, no, like then we lose the value of what camp really was, which to me was a way for a very marginalized community to claim certain works of art as somehow speaking to them in a different way that
Did
they
you see
were
Theater
choosing.
Camp?
Yes, I loved it.
I love that movie. Did you find it
I
to
love
be
that
camp
movie.
or no? Just
No.
a comedy. Okay.
Yeah, I loved it though. We saw it with the kids. It was so good.
Us too. Yeah, I loved it.
So good on the big screen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great movie.
Oh my God. Abdi, we did it. We made a podcast.
Oh my God, I want to talk for another hour.
Well, we can
I know,
do
we
that.
need a podcast.
We're not going to record it. But if anybody does want to reach out to you or find your work, your novels should all be read. I've been privileged enough to read everything you've ever written, and I'm honored to have done so. Where can people find you?
Often way before it's published.
Yes.
You can find me. I'm most active on Instagram, where I am Abdaddy. At Abdaddy, you can find me. Talk to me about Mommie Dearest. Many of my books. I mean, I do movies and TV and books as well, but it's amazing now that I'm thinking about it, how many of my books, either like my last book, Only This Beautiful Moment, Joan Crawford is a character. A lot of it takes place in the 30s in Hollywood.
Yes.
Most of it in Like a Love Story, which is my novel about 3 teenagers dealing with the AIDS crisis in New York and ACT UP. There's a whole scene about Mommie Dearest and how this young girl's mother and her friends find it really offensive that they laugh at Mommie Dearest because it's about abuse. And there's a whole conversation around like, well, why is it funny to this community? So
Yes.
I now that I'm talking to you, I realize, my God, everything we've talked about is so woven into my psyche and my work.
Yes. And I am glad for it. Okay, so I'm going to tell everybody my business about my podcast, which is that Make Me a Nerd is a production of True Story FM, produced by the peerless Pete Wright. My theme song is Wonderstruck by Jane and the Boy. You can find me on social media on Instagram at Mandy_Kaplan_Clavens, both with Ks. Please, 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 if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, leave me a review, write a review. Don't just hit the 5 stars, but reach out, ask questions, engage. I'd love to hear from people there. Or you can find me on Discord now. Make Me a Nerd is on Discord, and you can find information about all of this and the membership, which you can subscribe to at makemeanerd.com. If you hit that join button, $5 a month gets you episodes ad-free and early and a lot of bonus content. So please, please consider subscribing so I can keep this journey going. Join me next week when I am doing Wynonna Earp. Have you seen that, Abdi?
No.
Oh,
What is
feel
that?
like-
I'm Googling it. Wynonna
yes.
Earp? Is that related to Wyatt Earp or Wynonna
is.
Judd?
It's-
I'm
no.
like, is it Wynonna Judd as Wyatt Earp? Wynonna Earp is a supernatural Western TV series. I've never heard of this.
I'm going to get geeky about it, so join me next week.
But let me tell you that somebody someday should do a whole episode about Johnny Guitar, the Joan Crawford Western that is a Looney Tunes movie. It's also like a masterpiece. Like Martin Scorsese's obsessed with it, but wow.
There are other actors other than Joan Crawford.
Who are they? And are they named Faye Dunaway? It's only Joan and Faye. No, I'm kidding.
All right. Well, thank you, Abdi. I love you so much. Thank you for doing this. And I will see you all on the next Make Me a Nerd.